Chapter 6. Lead from the front. Authority. In any group, the person on top consciously or unconsciously sets the tone. If leaders are fearful, hesitant to take any risk, or overly concerned for their ego and reputation, then this invariably filters its way through the entire group and makes effective action impossible. Complaining and haranguing people to work harder has a counterproductive effect. You must adopt the opposite style. Imbue your troops with the proper spirit through actions, not words. They see you working harder than anyone, holding yourself to the highest standards, taking risks with confidence, and making tough decisions. This inspires and binds the group together. In these democratic times, you must practice what you preach. Big old facts. So I see that we have Rachel Johnson and Maria just hopped on. Welcome. I'm gonna wave you guys right now to acknowledge that you guys are here. Won't even let me wave my baby on the slide, but you know what? It is what it is, but you know, what can you do? Anyways, the Hustler King. No man can properly command an army from the rear. He must be at the front, at the very head of the army. He must be seen there, and the effect of his mind and personal energy must be felt by every officer and man present with it. A quote by General William T. Sherman. By the spring of 1991, young Curtis Jackson had proved himself to be one of the savviest hustlers in the neighborhood. His pool of repeat customers had increased to the point where he had to hire his own crew to keep up with the demand. But as he knew, nothing good ever lasts too long in the hood. Just as Curtis was making plans to expand his business, an older hustler named Wayne began to make threatening gestures towards him. Wayne had recently returned to the streets from prison. He was determined to make as much money as fast as possible and dominate the local drug trade. Curtis, it seemed, was his main rival. He tried to intimidate the younger hustler, warning him that he better curtail his operations or pay a price. Curtis ignored him. Then Wayne decided to up the ante. He sent out word on the street that he was going to have Curtis killed. Curtis had seen this happen before, and he knew what would happen next. Wayne would never do the job himself. He could not risk a return to prison. Instead, he was banking on the fact that some young kid would hear of his desire to kill Curtis and, eager to gain some street credibility, would take it upon himself to do the dirty work. Sure enough, a few days after hearing of Wayne's intentions, Curtis noticed that a young man named Nitty tailing him on the streets. He felt certain that Nitty was the one planning to do the hit, and it would happen soon. This was the depressing dynamic of hustling in the hood. The more success a hustler had, the more he attracted the wrong kind of attention. Unless he inspired some fear and terror, rivals would keep coming at him, trying to take what he had and continually threatening his position on the streets. Once that started to happen, the once successful dealer would find himself drawn into a cycle of violence, reprisals, and time in the pen. There were a few hustlers, however, who had somehow managed to rise above this dynamic. In the hood, they were like kings. Just hearing their names or seeing them on the street would elicit a gut reaction, a mix of fright and admiration. What elevated them above the others was a series of actions they had taken in the past that demonstrated that they were fearless and smart. Their maneuvers would be unpredictable and all the more terrifying for it. If people thought of challenging them, they would quickly remember what these types had done in other circumstances and back off. All of this would give them an aura of power and mystery. Instead of challengers on all sides, they would have disciples ready to follow them as far as they wanted. If Curtis saw himself as the kingly type, it was time now to show it to others as dramatically as possible. With death staring him in the face, he worked to control his emotions and thought long and hard about the dilemma that Wayne had posed. If he came after Wayne to kill him first, Wayne would be ready and would have the perfect excuse to kill Curtis in self-defense. If he went after Nitty and killed him, the police would catch Curtis and he would end up in prison for a long time, an equally fortunate result for Wayne. And if he did nothing, Nitty would finish him off. But Wayne's strategy had a fatal flaw. His fear of doing the job with his own hands, of course. He was no king himself, but just another frightened hustler pretending to be tough. Curtis would come after him from an unexpected angle and turn everything around. Without wasting any more time, he asked a member of his crew named Tony to accompany him that afternoon. Together they surprised Nitty on the street, and while Tony held him, Curtis slashed the kid in the face with a razor blade. He did it just deep enough to send him screaming to the hospital and leave a nice scar for a while. Then, after a few hours later, he and Tony found Wayne's empty car and shot it up, an ambiguous message that meant either they hoped he was inside or they were taunting him to come out and attack them in the open. The following day, the dominoes fell just as Curtis thought they would. Nitty sought out Wayne, expecting that the two of them would go together to exact revenge on Curtis. After all, Wayne had been attacked as well. Wayne, however, still insisted the kid do it alone. Now Nitty could see through the game. He was just a patsy to do the dirty work, and Wayne was just not as tough as he made himself out to be. Nitty would have nothing more to do with him, but he was also too afraid to take on Curtis by himself. He decided he could live with the scar. Wayne was now in a delicate position. If he asked someone else to do the job, it would start to look like what it was, a man too scared to do it himself. Better to let the whole thing just go away. In the days to come, the hood was abuzz with the story of what happened. Young Curtis had outmaneuvered and outsmarted the older rival. Unlike the latter, he was unafraid to do the violence himself. What he had done was bold and dramatic. It had come out of nowhere. Every time people would see Nitty on the streets with a long scar on his face, they were reminded of the incidents. Rivals would now have to think twice before challenging his status. He showed he was tough and crafty, and those in his crew were duly impressed with this sang-froid and how he had turned the situation around. Then they now saw him differently, as somebody who could last in the jungle and was worth following. Curtis followed this up with similar actions and slowly elevated himself to the other hustlers. Now there were younger ones who looked him up and would soon form the core devoted band of disciples that would help him in the transition to music. After the success of his first album in 2003, Curtis, now known as 50 Cent, began to realize his dream of forging a business empire. But as this took shape in the months and years to follow, he began to feel that something was wrong. It would be natural to believe that with his current position and fame, those working with him would simply follow his lead and do what he wanted. But his whole life had been a lesson in the opposite. People continually take from you, they doubt your powers and challenge you. In this environment, his executives and managers were not trying to take his money or his life, but rather he had a feeling that they were nibbling away at his power, trying to soften his image and make him more corporate and predictable. If he let this go on, he would lose the quality that made him different, his propensity to take risk and do the unexpected. He might become a safe investment, but he would no longer be a leader and a creative force. In this world, you cannot relax or rest on your name, your past achievements, your title. You have to fight to impose your difference and compel people to follow your lead. All of these thoughts became painfully clear to him in the summer of 2007. His third album, Curtis, was to be released in September of that year, and everyone seemed to be asleep. The record label Interscope were acting as if the album would sell itself. His management team put together a marketing campaign that he felt was too tame, passive, and corporate. They were trying to control too much. Then one afternoon, an employee at G-Unit Records, 50's own label within Interscope, told him that a video for the upcoming album somehow got leaked to the internet. If it spread, it would mess up the carefully orchestrated rollout of songs that had been planned for that month. 50 was the first to hear this, and after attempting what to do next, After contemplating what to do next, he decided it was finally time to shake up the dynamic, to do the unpredictable, and play the part of the hustler king. He called it to his office his radio and internet team at G Unit. Instead of working to contain the viral spread of the video, the usual response to such a problem and what management would advocate, he ordered them to surreptitiously leak it to other sites and let it spread like wildfire. On top of this move, they created the following story to tell journalists for public consumption. When 50 heard of the leak, he flew into a wild rage. He threw his phone at the window with such force he cracked it. He tore the plasma TV off the wall and smashed it into pieces. He left the building in a fit, and the last thing they heard him yelling was that he was shutting it all down and going on vacation. That evening, on 50's orders, they had the maintenance man for the building take pictures of the damage, all faked for this purpose, and then leaked the photos to the internet. They were to keep all of this a secret. Not even management was to know that this drama was completely manufactured. Like many other dramas in this world is, as you know. In the days to come, 50 watched with satisfaction as his story spread everywhere. Interscope was awakened from its slumber. Management was sent the message that he was now in command. If he refused to do any more publicity, as he had threatened, their whole campaign was doomed. They had to follow his lead here and let him set the tone for the publicity, which meant something more aggressive and fluid. Among 50's executives and employees, word spread quickly of what supposedly happened. His reputation for being unpredictable and violent brought to life. When they now saw him in the offices, they felt a twinge of fear. Better to pay attention to what he wanted than risk witnessing his anger. And for the public, this was just the kind of story they expected from the thug rapper. It compelled their attention. They could laugh at his out-of-control antics, not realizing that it was 50 directing the drama who would have the last laugh. The fearless approach. When I reached the top in business, I adjusted to my new position. I became bolder and crazier than before, and listened to even less people who tried to slow me down. A quote by 50 Cent himself. Throughout history, we have witnessed the following pattern. Certain people stand out from the crowd because of some special skill or talent they have. Perhaps they're masters at the political game, knowing how to charm and win the proper allies. Or maybe they have the superior technical knowledge in their field. Or maybe they are the ones who initiate some bold venture that has success. In any event, these types suddenly find themselves in leadership positions, something for which their past experience and education has not prepared them. Now they are alone at the top, and on the top, their every decision and action scrutinized by the group and the public. These pressures can be intense, and what inevitably happens is that many of them unconsciously succumb to all kinds of fears. Whereas before they might have been bold and creative, now they grow cautious and conservative, aware of the heightened stakes. Secretly scared of being held accountable for the success of the group, they overdelegate, poll to everyone for their opinions, or refrain from making the hard decisions. Or they become excessively dictatorial, trying to control everything. Another sign of weakness and insecurity. It is the story of the great senators who make lousy presidents, bold lieutenants who turn into mediocre generals, or top-level managers who become incompetent executives. And yet, among the group, there are inevitably a few who demonstrate the opposite. They rise to the position, displaying ordinary leadership skills that no one had suspected were in them. We find in this group people like Napoleon Bonaparte, Mahatma Gandhi, and Winston Churchill. What links these people together is not some mysterious skill or bit of knowledge, but rather a quality of character, a temperament that reveals the essence of art. They are fearless. They do not shrink from making the hard decisions by themselves. Instead, they relish such responsibility. They do not suddenly become more conservative, but in fact show a propensity for bold action. They exhibit tremendous grace under fire, which is an important thing that we must do right now. By the way, guys, if you guys are viewing this on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, wherever, you got to have grace under fire. All right. Anyways, Such types come to understand in various ways that a leader has a unique power that generally goes untapped. Any group tends to assume the spirit and energy of the person on top. If the person is weak and passive, then a group tends to splinter into factions. If such leaders lack confidence, their insecurities tend to filter their way down the line. Their nervous, fretful moods put everyone on edge. But there is always the opposite possibility. A leader who is audacious, out in front and setting the tone and agenda for the group sparks a higher energy level and confidence. Such a person on top does not need to yell or push people around. Those below want to follow his or her lead because it is strong and inspiring. In war, where leadership skills are more immediately apparent and necessary because lives are at stake, we can distinguish two leadership styles, from behind or from the front. The former type of general likes to stay in his tent or headquarters, bark out orders, feeling that having such distance makes it easier to command. This style can also mean involving lieutenants and other generals in important decisions, choosing to lead by committee. In both cases, the commander is trying to hide himself from scrutiny, accountability, and danger. The greatest generals in history, however, are invariably those who lead from the front and by themselves. They can be seen by the troops at the head of the army, exposing themselves to the same fate as any foot soldier. The Duke of Wellington said that the mere appearance of Napoleon Bonaparte at the head of his army translated into the equivalent of an additional 40,000 men. A kind of electrical charge passes through the troops. He is sharing in their sacrifices, leading by example. It is almost religious connotations. We notice that the two styles in business and politics as well. The executives who lead from behind will always try to disguise it as a virtue, the need for secrecy, or their desire to be more fair and democratic. But it really stems from fear, and it invariably leads to a lack of respect from those below. The opposite style, leading from the front and by example, has the same power in the office as it does on the battlefield. Leaders who work harder than anyone else, who practice what they preach, who are not afraid to be accountable for tough decisions or to take risks, will find that they have created a well of respect that will pay great dividends down the road. They can ask for sacrifices, punish troublemakers, and make occasional mistakes, all without facing the usual grumbling and doubts. They don't have to yell, complain, or force their men and women to follow. People do so willingly. In urban environments such as Southside Queens, respect is an extremely important issue. In other places, your background, education, or resume might lend you some authority and credibility, but not in the hood. There, everyone starts from zero. To gain respect from your peers, you must repeatedly prove yourself. People are constantly prone to doubting your abilities and your power. You must show again and again that you have what it takes to thrive and last. Big words and promises mean nothing. Only actions carry weight. If you are authentic, as tough as you seem to be, then you will earn respect that will make people back off and make your life much easier. This should be your perspective as well. You start with nothing in this world. Any titles, money, or privilege you inherit are actually hindrances. They delude you into believing that you are owed respect. If you continue to impose your will because of such privileges, people will come to disdain and despise you. Instead, only your actions can prove your worth. They tell people who you are. You must imagine that you are continually being challenged to show that you deserve the position you occupy. In a culture full of fakery and hype, you will stand out as someone authentic and worthy of respect. The greatest leaders in history all inevitably learned by experience the following lesson. It is much better to be feared and respected than to be loved. I strongly, strongly, strongly disagree with that statement. And by the way, it is a statement by Niccolo Machiavelli, if you're wondering. As a prime example, look at the film director John Ford, the man behind some of the greatest films in Hollywood history. The task of film directors can be particularly difficult. They have to deal with large crews, actors with their delicate egos. Oh my God, I've dealt with some of them. not naming names, and directorial and dictatorial producers who want to meddle every step of the way, all the while being under extreme time limits with large amounts of money at stake. The tendency for directors is to give ground to these various battlefields, to to placate and cajole actors to let the producers have their way here and there to gain some cooperation by being pleasant and likable. Ford was by nature a sensitive and empathetic man, but he learned that if he revealed this side of his personality, he quickly lost control over the final product. The actors and producers would begin to assert themselves, and the film would lose any sense of cohesion. He noticed that the notoriously nice directors never really lasted very long. They were pushed around and their films were lousy. Early on in his career, he decided that he would have to forge a kind of mask for himself, that of a man who was implacable and even a bit frightening. On set, he made it clear that he was not the usual prima donna director. He would work longer hours than anyone. If they were filming on some location with harsh conditions, he would sleep in a tent like everyone else and share their bad food. On occasion, he would get into violent fistfights on set, most often with his leading actors such as John Wayne. These fights were not for show. They were bruising and engaged them with all they were bruising and he engaged them with all his strength, making the actors fight back with equal force. This would set a tone. An actor would tend to feel embarrassed by engaging in his usual prissy behavior and ego tantrums. Everyone was treated the same, even the Archduke of Austria trying to carve out a career as a Hollywood actor. He was yelled at and pushed into a ditch by Ford himself. He had a unique way of directing actors. He would say only a few well-chosen words about what he wanted from them. Then, if they did the wrong thing on set, he would brutally humiliate them in front of everyone. They quickly learned that they had to pay attention to a few words he spoke and to his body language on set, which would often tell more. They had to raise their levels of cooperation and bring even more of themselves into the part. Once, when the famous producer Samuel Goldwyn visited the set, he told Ford he just wanted to watch him work, a producer's way of spying and applying pressure. Ford didn't say a word. The next day, however, he visited Goldwyn in his office and just sat silently in the chair across Goldwyn's desk, glaring at him. After a while, Goldwyn, exasperated, asked him what he was doing. He just wanted to watch Goldwyn work, Ford answered. Goldwyn would never visit him again on set and quickly learned to give him his space. All of this had a strange and paradoxical effect on the cast and crew. They had came to love working for John Ford, and would die to gain a place amongst his exclusive team and return staff. His standards were so high, it forced them to work harder. He made them superior actors and technicians. An occasional nice gesture or compliment on his part carried double the weight and would be remembered for a lifetime. The end results of his tough and unforgiving manner was that he managed to maintain a higher degree of control over the final product than most other directors, and his films were consistently of the highest quality. Nobody dared to challenge his authority, and he lasted in Hollywood as the king of westerns and action films for well over 40 years, an unprecedented achievement in the industry. Understand, to be a leader often requires making tough choices, getting people to do things against their will. If you have chosen a soft, pleasing, compliant style of leadership out of fear of being disliked, you will find yourself with less and less room to compel people to work harder or make sacrifices. If you suddenly try to be tough, they will often feel wounded and personally upset. They can move from love to hate. The opposite approach yields the opposite result. If you build a reputation for toughness and getting results, people might resent you, but you will establish a foundation of respect. You are demonstrating a genuine qualities of leadership that speak to everyone. Now, with the time and a well-founded authority, you have the room to back off and reward people, even to be nice. When you do so, it will be seen as a genuine gesture, not an attempt to get people to like you, and it will have double effect. Keys to fearlessness. For it is a general rule of human nature that people despise those who treat them well and look up to those who make no concessions. A quote by by Thucydides. Yeah. Forget it. I ain't gonna even try to pronounce this guy's name. Thousands of years ago, our primitive ancestors formed groups for power and protection. But as these groups got larger, they encountered a problem with human nature that plagues us to this day. Individuals have different levels of talent, ambition, and assertiveness. Their interests do not necessarily converge on all points. When it comes to the important decisions upon which the fate of the tribe hangs, the members will often think of their narrow agendas. A group of humans is always on the verge of splintering into the chaos of divergent interests. For this purpose, leaders were chosen to make the hard decisions and end all of the dissension. But the members of the tribe would inevitably feel ambivalence towards their leaders. They saw the necessity for them and the respect they should be paid to their authority, but they feared that their chieftains and kings would accumulate too much power and oppress them. They often wonder why this particular person or family deserves such a lofty position. In many ancient cultures, the king was ritually put to death after a few years to ensure that he would not be turned into an oppressor. In more advanced ancient civilizations, there were constant rebellions against those in power, much more intense and numerous than anything we have known in the modern era. Of all of the leaders in the ancient times who had to deal with such difficulties, none stands out more than Moses. He had been chosen by God to lead the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt and into the Promised Land. Although the Hebrews suffered in Egypt, they had relative security. Moses wrestled them from this predictable life and set them to wander for 40 years in the wilderness, where they were plagued by the lack of food, shelter, and basic comforts. They constantly doubted Moses and even came to hate him. Some plotting to kill him as the king who needed to be sacrificed. They saw him as an oppressor and madman. To aid his cause, God would perform regular miracles to show that Moses was chosen and blessed. But those miracles were quickly forgotten, and the Hebrews kept resorting to their endless complaining and recalcitrance. To overcome the seemingly impossible obstacles in his path, Moses resorted to a unique solution. He united the 12 constantly divided tribes around a single simple cause, one God to worship, and the attainable goal of reaching the Promised Land. He was not there for power or glory, but merely to lead them to this much desired goal. Moses could not afford to absent himself for a day or two or to ease up on his leadership. The tribes were continually prone to doubt him and forget that the larger picture, the reason for their suffering. The Hebrew word for lead means to be out in front, to drive. He had to be out there and constantly in the vanguard, unifying them around his vision of the Promised Land. This meant being ruthless with internal dissenters, putting whole families to death that stood in the way of the larger cause. In essence, Moses learned to play a role for the Hebrews, the man who possessed the vision from God, indomitable in spirit and acting for the greater good. A normal tribe member would have to ask him or himself or herself if this promised land was not something that existed merely in Moses' mind. But the force of his conviction and determination to lead people to the promised land made it hard to doubt him. He had to play his role to convince them his top position was legitimate and sanctioned by God. His ability to lead such a fractious group for some 40 years has to be considered the greatest masterpiece in leadership history. You know, we moderns believe that we have moved far beyond our primitive tribal origins. After all, we live in a secular, rational world. A leader today needs to possess certain technical and managerial skills. But 3,000 years of civilization have not altered human nature, and in fact, the endless difficulties that plague such leaders as Moses have become only much more acute. Whereas before we humans might think of the first of the tribe, we now think primarily of ourselves, our careers, and our narrow interests. Office politics is the extreme endpoint of this trend. We are now more distracted than ever, with thousands of bits of information competing for our attention in the course of the day. This makes us less patient and capable of seeing the larger picture. If we were being led out of slavery, we would not be able to focus on a promised land for more than a few minutes. We are much more skeptical when it comes to those in authority. We still feel the ancient ambivalence towards rulers. Instead of sacrificing them, we feed them to the press and secretly gloat in their downfall. To be a leader now means overcoming these aspects of human nature while still seeming to be fair and decent, an almost impossible task. At the same time, however, people feel this division and selfishness as a depressing phenomenon. They depressingly want to believe in a cause, to work for the greater good, to follow a leader who imbues them with a sense of purpose. They are more than receptive to the kind of quasi-religious leadership that Moses embodies. As the one on top, you must rid yourself of the modern prejudices, your fetishism of technical means. To be a leader still means that you are playing a role, out in front, fearlessly driving the group forward. If you fail to unify the group around some glorious cause, some equivalent of the promised land, then you will find that you are having to push and pull your followers who are constantly splitting up into factions. Instead, you must assume a prophetic air, and if you were merely chosen to lead them towards some higher goal. You are compelling them to follow on their own, making less a show of personal power and more demonstration of the cause that unites them all. This will give them proper authority to lead an aura of power. To master the art of leadership, you must see yourself as playing certain parts that will impress your disciples and make them more likely to follow you with the necessary enthusiasm. The following are the four main roles that you must learn to perform. The first role is the visionary. By the beginning of the 20th century, Thomas Alva Edison was seen as America's prominent inventor and scientist. His research labs were the source of the most important technological breakthroughs of the time. But the truth is that Edison himself had only a few months of formal education and was not really a scientist at all. Instead, he was a mix of a visionary, strategist, and a shrewd businessman. His method was simple. He scoured the globe looking for all of the latest advances in science and technology. With his understanding of business and the latest social trends, he thought long and hard about how some of these operating with the mission statement is an effective way of softening your image and disguising the extent of your power. You are seen more than just a leader, you are a role model, instructing, energizing, and inspiring your lieutenants. In crafting this team, look for people who share your values and are open to learning. Do not be seduced by a glittering resume. You want them near you to absorb your spirit and ways of doing things. Once you feel that they have the proper training, you must not be afraid to let go of the reins and give them more independence. In the end, this will save you much energy and allow you to keep focusing on a greater strategic picture. And the fourth type is the bold knight. Every group has a kind of collective energy, and on its own, this will tend towards inertia. This comes from people's powerful gestures to keep things comfortable, easy, and familiar. Over time, in any group, conventions and protocol will assume a greater importance and governs people's behavior. The larger the group, the more conservative it will tend to become. And the greater this force of inertia. The paradox is the defensive, passive posture has a depressing effect on morale, much like sitting in one place for too long will lower your spirits. More than likely, you rose to the top by virtue of your boldness and desperate desire to get ahead. You took risks that made you rise to the occasion with all of your energy and creativity. This fearless spirit attracted positive attention. The group inertia will naturally tend to tamp all of that down and neutralize the source of your power. Since you are a leader, you are the one who can alter this and set a pace that is more alive and active. You remain the bold and enterprising knight. You force yourself to initiate new projects and domains to conquer. You take proactive measures against possible dangers on the horizon. You seize the initiative against your rivals. You keep your group marching and on the offensive. This will excite them and give them a feeling of movement. You are not taking unnecessary risks, but simply adding a dash of aggression to your normally staid group. They become used to seeing you out in front and grow addicted to the excitement you bring with each new campaign. Reversal of perspective. We live in times of great mistrust of any form of authority. Some of this springs from the envy of those who have power and the power you have achieved something. Some of it comes from experiences with people who abuse their position of power to get their way. In any event, such distrust makes it harder to be strong and an effective leader. Under the sway of this leveling force, you might be tempted to act with less authority to be more like everyone else, or to make yourself likable. This will only make your job that much harder. Instead, it is better that you see the whole concept of authority in a different light. The word authority comes from the Latin word authore, which means author, a person who creates something new. This could be a work of art, a new way of operating in a world, or new values. The health of any society depends on those who infuse it with such innovations. These works or actions by individuals give them credibility and authority to do more. The great Roman general Scipio Africanus, the elder, invented a whole new style of warfare in a campaign against Hannibal that was tremendously successful. This gave him the authority to lead the campaign itself and a ladder to launch a political career. For the Romans, if you simply acted as if your position entitled you to certain powers, you lost your authority. You were no longer an author, a contributor, but a passive consumer of power. As a leader, this is how you must view yourself. You are the author creating a new order, writing a new act in some drama. You never rest on your laurels or past achievements. Instead, you are constantly taking action that moves the group forward and brings positive results. The record speaks for itself. Despite the spirit of the times, people have a secret yearning to be guided by a firm hand, by someone who knows where they are going. It is distrustful to always feel distracted and distressful to always feel distracted and wandering. The members of your group will give you the respect and authority you require if you earn it as the author and creator. In the end, if people mistrust and resist your authority, you really only have yourself to blame. Here's a quote by Karl von Clausewitz. A distinguished commander without boldness is unthinkable. No man who is not bold who can play such a role, and therefore we consider this quality of the first prerequisite of the great military leader. How much of this quality remains by the time he reaches senior rank, after training and experience have affected and modified it, is another question. The greater extent to which it is retained, the greater range of his genius. So, that basically concludes the rest of chapter 6 on lead from the front, authority. So, basically, like what I got from this chapter is basically you have to step up as a leader, whether it's in your family, at your job, if you're a business owner, definitely in that area, as a content creator, in pretty much any and all aspects of your life, you have to keep the same energy. You can't be a really strong leader at work, but be a piss poor leader in your family, with your friends, and in other aspects of your life, like I said. And so we must also keep in mind our own natural talents and our own abilities and actually leverage them, and actually not being afraid to delegate certain tasks. Like, in business, you hear about that all the time, about people delegating tasks to a business. Like, people delegate the video editing and the video, and the cinematography and the graphic design to another person who's highly talented at that. And so, that's also what I got from the chapter, was on the aspect of letting go of being a control freak, so to speak. And I know that within myself, I have a lot of control freak tendencies that I'm still working on overcoming in my own personal life, because I noticed that, invariably that freak tendency has came from the fact that, people didn't do what I wanted them to do. And when I was younger, I would have these Machiavellian tendencies to try to make the family members do what I wanted them to do, just so I can get the love and affection that I wanted. But as I got older, I realized that that was not a sustainable strategy in acquiring what I wanted. And instead, I had to come from a place of unconditional love and caring and understanding. And so I really got to working on overcoming that aspect of myself that feels like he has to manipulate in order to gain something from people. And I'll tell you another thing, guys, is that reading Robert Greene's books has brought me much more clarity about myself. And that is why I say to this day that Robert Greene is one of my favorite authors, and why I highly recommend that you read his books. That's the reason why I'm reading The 50th Law. And yes, I will read the rest of his books as time goes on these read-through series that I'm going to be doing for years and years and years to come. But yeah, I just basically just got moments of clarity, and I just find myself sitting there like, damn, like, no wonder why I was acting like this. And so, that gave me the tools and the wherewithal to pinpoint my own issues and to actively working on and to get to actively working on them, instead of pointing the finger at everybody else and blaming them for the reason why I don't feel loved and feel accepted. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to give you guys another bonus fact about me. So, as I was like talking with my fiance, and my fiance is watching this live as we speak, so give a shout out to my fiance, Virginia Francisco. She's helped me overcome a lot of shit in my life. But yeah, we were having a conversation one night, and I was telling her, about my childhood experiences of being bullied by my family members when I was little. And she was telling me, like, well, at the time, you were a kid, you knew on an unconscious level that you create your reality, but at the same time, you had amnesia. You had that spiritual amnesia to where you didn't recognize that you had that power to consciously create. And so because you felt like you had to compete for attention and love and affection in your family, you subconsciously created scenarios where you were bullied just to get that compassion. And then I thought to myself, after I just like backtracked to all of those scenarios, I'm like, damn, like that was really unsustainable. And it was causing me to attract more chaos into my life that I didn't want nor needed. And so, I realize now that I'm 22 years old that those were like very dysfunctional. That was a very dysfunctional way of trying to acquire love and approval outside of myself. And then I realized as I got older, the need to love myself more. So I started actively practicing that more and more by attending to my own needs and getting what I want for myself, and to also, give myself that love and encouragement instead of trying to get it from somebody else. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect at this, because I'm not. I'm still working on fine-tuning this within myself, that self-love and that self-care. But yeah, it is a process and it is a journey, and I'm enjoying learning more about myself. And I hope that you guys are enjoying the read-throughs that I'm doing so far of this book. Like I said, I got many more coming. Many more. I don't plan on stopping this at all anytime soon. But it's just like one of those moments where you just sit back and think about all of the decisions you made up until this point, and seeing as how those decisions were very dysfunctional, and how when you was at like a certain vibrational frequency, that those decisions brought only more chaos into your life, versus now that you're on a higher frequency, you're actively making decisions that are healthy for you. So shouts out to the people that are working on their leadership skills and working on themselves, most importantly, because you can't be an effective leader if you don't work on yourself. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You can't be an effective leader if you're not even practicing positive self-leadership. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like today, in the past few days, I've been waking up groggy. And that is because I'm willing to wake up to read through these chapters with you. But seeing as how my body is telling me is that I need to wake up at a later time so that when I do these readings, it'll be that much more greater and I can be more effective at them. I'm just actively working on self-leadership. Like I said, I'm not perfect at it, but I'm working at it every single day. Even if it's a small, teeny tiny little baby or puppy dog step, it's still a step in the right direction nonetheless. So yeah. And if you guys have any questions you want to ask me, any thoughts that you have on the chapter or through the 50th Law book in general, just list them in the comments below. And if you want to buy the book for yourself and support me and Robert Greene, because yeah, I do have an affiliate link in this book. This also helps me continue to do things like this and to continue to create content and to even enhance my content creation skills and also learn other skills. So the link to this book is in the description above, below, side to side, however you see it. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today.